The rotors thundered overhead like a giant mechanical heartbeat, steady and unconcerned, even though the desert winds outside the hangar lashed against the metal walls in restless bursts. Inside the cockpit of the UH-60, sunlight streamed through the wide panels of bulletproof glass, drifting over the switches, levers, and flight instruments as if the aircraft itself were waking from sleep. And at its controls sat a woman most newcomers still didn't know how to read. First Lieutenant Mara Keaton had learned long ago that silence was a better introduction than anything she could say. Words were easy, skill was harder, and in her whirl, Army aviation's skill outranked everything. So while the morning briefing still echoed in her ears, while the smell of fuel and hot metal still lingered in the air, she simply tightened her harness and let the familiar rhythm of flight preparation settle her nerves. Click, switch, confirm, breathe. The desert beyond the cockpit stretched in every direction, an endless, sun-scorched wasteland full of jagged ridgelines and dune-filled valleys, the kind of place that taught pilots humility fast. Mara had flown over mountains, oceans, jungles, but the desert had a way of reminding you that human life was fragile, and the earth was older than your fears. Her crew chief leaned in through the side door. "Bird's good on fuel. Transmission checks clean. You're green across the board." Mara nodded. "Copy, strap in. We're wheels up in 5. He hesitated, just a fraction. Most people did around her at first. Maybe it was her calmness. Too calm, some said. Maybe it was her reputation from her last unit. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. Or maybe it was that she simply didn't look like the pilot most expected when they heard the new warrants a legend. She didn't correct the rumors, and she didn't chase the praise. She just did her job. The door closed with a slam, the engine spooled to life, their rising whine vibrating through the seat and into her ribs. Mara rested her hand on the cyclic, letting the aircraft's hum sync with her breathing. Every pilot had that moment, the one where the machine felt like an extension of their own body. And for her, that connection came the second the blades began carving the air. Through the side window, she caught a glimpse of the airfield. Mechanics rolling tool carts, dust clouds drifting around parked Humvees, junior soldiers jogging between buildings with clipboards in hand. The base looked calm, routine, but Mara knew better. There was always a reason for a sudden, unscheduled check flight at dawn, a reason no one wanted to say out loud. "Control, Raven 6, reporting ready for departure," she said into her headset, her voice steady and clipped. Static crackled, followed by the tower's reply, "Raven 6, cleared for takeoff. Wind steady at 11 knots. Good luck." She smirked at the last part. Pilots always said there were two types of flights, routine ones and the ones that became stories whispered in mess halls years later. She didn't know yet which kind this would be. As she lifted the helicopter from the tarmac, the world shifted beneath her, weightless, fluid, responsive. The desert rose to meet her, spreading out like an ancient map. Every shadow hinted at a ridge or drop. Every shimmer of heat threatened to distort her depth perception. She steadied her hand, kept her breathing slow. The first few minutes were quiet. Her crew settled into their positions, the crew chief monitoring the rear cabin while the co-pilot scanned the terrain ahead. Mara kept the aircraft low, skimming just above the rising currents of hot air. It felt good, better than good. Flying had always been the one place her mind didn't run ahead of her, but the peace didn't last. Her co-pilot leaned forward, adjusting their headset. "Ma'am, you see that?" he asked, pointing toward a far ridge. Mara narrowed her eyes. A faint glint sparkled on the horizon, metal reflecting sunlight, not a natural shape, not a desert mirage, something man-made, something moving. "I see it," she said quietly, her grip tightened around the cyclic. The mission had just stopped being routine, and the desert suddenly felt very small. The glint on the ridge vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by a rising curtain of desert heat. Mara steadied the bird, banking slightly so the co-pilot could recheck the angle. "Nothing now," he muttered. "Might have been a lens flare. Or someone watching." Mara said, her voice low but steady. The desert had many kinds of silence, some harmless, some a warning. This one felt like the second. She lowered their altitude another 10 feet, skimming the gray, brown earth where dust devils spun lazy spirals. The UH-60 vibrated harder as the wind picked up, rattling loose panels, sending tiny tremors through the instrument panel. The gauges danced, needles flickering like nervous thoughts. Her crew chief chimed in over the intercom, "Ma'am, you want me scanning left sector, just in case, yes, and keep the cabin door cracked. I want full visual. Roger." Mara tightened her grip on the cyclic. If someone was out here with optics, binoculars, a rangefinder, worse, they needed to know it wasn't just tourists with a fancy camera. This sector of the training range was supposed to be empty today. Command had insisted on it. Too insisted. Her co-pilot checked the map tablet. "We're still within approved flight corridors. Nothing scheduled until afternoon. Tower didn't call anything in." "That doesn't mean there's nothing out here," she replied. A gust slammed into the helicopter's right side, pushing the nose slightly off course. Mara corrected instantly, fluidly, as if instinct alone controlled her actions. The desert winds behaved like creatures, unpredictable, sharp, and untrusting of strangers. She'd learned that lesson her first week in this command, during a sandstorm that almost grounded her permanently. The air grew rougher, bumping the aircraft like angry fists. Warning lights blinked yellow across the dashboard. Not critical, yet, but enough to make the cabin tense. "Ma'am, getting turbulence spikes." The co-pilot warned, "Ride it out." Mara said, "She'll hold." But even as she spoke, a flash of red cut through the yellow indicators. One of the transmission temperature gauges shot upward, its needle trembling dangerously close to the caution zone. That's not normal," her co-pilot said. "No, it's not." Mara agreed. The helicopter continued forward, the desert dropping away into a wide valley below. The sand seemed to blur together, forming long streaks of color. Tan, gold, brown, shifting like a river under the heat. Her crew chief called from the back. "Ma'am, I've got something at our 7 o'clock. Looks like dust. Maybe a vehicle tailing distance." Mara's pulse sharpened. "Civilian, hard to tell. Could be an ATV or truck. But it's moving fast. This was not supposed to be happening. A maintenance check flight was meant to be predictable, controlled, boring even, but they were being watched." Followed, and the aircraft was starting to show signs of mechanical strain exactly when it shouldn't. "Watch that gauge," she ordered. The transmission temp climbed another notch. The air grew hotter, harsher. The wind buffeted them again, harder this time, forcing Mara to counter with significant pressure on the cyclic. The cockpit filled with the smell of warmed metal and dust. Her co-pilot cleared his throat, trying to stay focused. "Ma'am, if this overheats, we'll have to set her down." "We're not there yet," Mara said, but inside, a knot tightened in her stomach. The helicopter began to shake, not violently, but enough to feel wrong. A vibration that wasn't caused by wind or turbulence, a vibration she recognized, a mechanical one. There was only one reason for that, and none of them were good. Her headset crackled. The crew chief's voice came through, tense. "Ma'am, dust trail is definitely a vehicle. Off-road, big tires, headed parallel to us. They're matching our vector. Copy. Keep eyes on." Then, another flicker on the ridge. Not a glint this time, a silhouette. Someone standing, watching. Her heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from cold focus. She had felt this before, in places far from home, in mountains where insurgents hid behind rocks, in jungles where shadows held rifles, in cities where windows reflected more danger than glass. "Control, Raven 6 checking in." She said into her mic, "We have possible civilian presence in restricted sector. Do you confirm no scheduled activity? Static." Then nothing, no response. Her co-pilot tried, "Control, this is Raven 6 Bravo. Please acknowledge." Silence again. Mara felt the tension inside the cockpit coil like wire, pulled too tight. The transmission gauge hit the red threshold. A piercing warning tone filled the cockpit. Her co-pilot swore, "We've got to put her down." Mara steadied the bird, eyes narrowing at the valley ahead. A broad stretch of relatively flat terrain. "Hold on," she ordered. She descended fast, keeping the helicopter stable despite the growing mechanical protest. Wind roared, sand exploded around them, the rotors fought to stay level. the world outside blurred into a storm of dust and heat. And as the helicopter dropped toward the valley floor, Mara realized the truth. Whatever, or whoever, was out here with them. This wasn't an accident. Something had drawn them into the desert, and now the mission was no longer a check flight. It was survival. The helicopter hit the valley floor harder than Mara wanted, skidding across loose sand before the landing gear dug in. Dust engulfed the aircraft, swallowing it in a choking cloud. The rotors continued spinning overhead, fighting the desert gusts with a tortured metallic whine. "Everyone okay?" Mara called out, voice cutting through the storm. Her crew chief coughed. "Bruised pride, maybe, but I'm good." "Same," the co-pilot muttered. "That was something." Mara didn't reply. She was already scanning the gauges. The transmission temp stayed in the red for several seconds before slowly, painfully dipping into the caution zone. Not great, but enough to keep the engine from cooking itself alive. The dust outside began to settle, revealing the valley in sharp fragments. Jagged boulders, patches of scrub, long scars carved into the earth by old riverbeds. A place where sound vanished too quickly. A place where visibility shifted from clear to lethal in seconds. "Ma'am," the crew chief said quietly, "vehicles still out there, closing in from the west. About 3 minutes." Mara's eyes narrowed. No insignia, no reports of civilian traffic, and no friendly training ops. She looked to the ridge where the silhouette had stood earlier. Gone. Too convenient. She tapped her mic again. "Control, Raven 6. Emergency landing in Valley Echo 2. We have possible hostile presence. Requesting immediate response. Static, again. They're jamming us," the co-pilot said, dread rising in his voice. "Someone brought equipment out here." Mara unbuckled her harness. "We're not staying in this bird if they get within rifle range." Her crew chief's head snapped toward her. "Dismount. Out here, ma'am. We've got limited cover and a helicopter that won't lift unless the transmission cools." She said, "We don't have a choice." The wind shifted again, pushing the last of the dust away. The desert became sharp and quiet. Too quiet. She grabbed her sidearm from the storage panel and chambered around. Her crew chief pulled the cabin door open just enough to peer through. Heat shimmered across the valley like molten glass. "There," he whispered. A vehicle bounced over the uneven ground. A desert off-road truck modified with heavy shocks and thick tires. Dust plumed behind it in a long, dirty trail. Its windows were tinted, too tinted, no markings, no flags, no plates, just intent. Mara felt her instincts fall into place. Cold, measured, lethal. She moved to the doorway and crouched behind the armored frame. "Distance," she asked. 200 meters and closing. Fast. The co-pilot's voice cracked. "Ma'am, if they're hostile, they are," she said simply. He swallowed hard, understood. The truck slowed abruptly, skidding sideways in the sand about 50 meters short of the helicopter. A tactical choice, close enough for guns, far enough to avoid rotor wash. A door opened, then another. 3 figures stepped out, silhouettes against the sun. No uniforms, no visible weapons yet, but the way they move, deliberate, spaced, coordinated, told Mara everything. These weren't civilians. The tallest one lifted a hand, signaling something to the others. "Ma'am," the crew chief whispered, "what's the plan?" Mara took a slow breath, steadying her pulse. The air felt sharper now, like the moment before thunder cracks. "We buy time," she said. "Enough for the transmission to cool, enough to get this bird airborne again." The tallest figure took a step forward, stopping at the edge of the valley floor. He tapped something on his wrist, some kind of device, and a distant crackle buzzed through their headsets. A voice came through, Lieutenant Mara Keaton. The voice said, calm and eerily certain, "You're going to power down your aircraft entirely." Mara didn't respond. Instead, she toggled her intercom off and murmured to her crew, "Time's up." The tall figure tilted his head, waiting. Mara made her choice. She stepped fully into view, weapon drawn, stance solid. The desert wind whipped strands of hair across her cheek as she locked eyes with the intruders. "You picked the wrong valley," she said quietly. The response was instant. One of the men raised a rifle. Mara fired first. The shot cracked through the valley like lightning, echoing off the ridges. The man stumbled, not hit fatally, but shocked into cover. The other 2 ducked behind their vehicle. "Go," she shouted to her crew. Her co-pilot scrambled back to the cockpit, shouting into the intercom even though no one could hear. The crew chief grabbed spare ammunition and tossed her a second magazine. The engine whined behind her, weak but alive. The transmission gauge dipped one more line downward. Almost there, enemy fire erupted, bullets kicking up sand at her feet. Mara dropped behind a boulder, returning a controlled burst to keep them pinned. The wind roared again. The blades spun faster. The helicopter strained, lifting an inch, then two. Mara, her co-pilot, yelled, "We're ready." She sprinted through the sand, diving into the cockpit as the bird pulled upward. Her crew chief slammed the door shut, and just as the helicopter rose above the valley floor, she caught one last glimpse of the strangers, scrambling, furious, dust swirling around them, but they were too late. Mara pulled the cyclic toward the sky. The bird stabilized. The desert dropped away. Sunlight broke through the thinning haze like a victory banner. The mission had been a trap, but she had survived it. And tomorrow, someone would have to explain why a group of unidentified operatives were waiting for her in the middle of a supposedly empty training zone. For now, though, she focused on flying, steady, controlled, unbreakable. Because that was what she did, and the desert, at last, felt wide again.